we see Mr. Westmus make a comment that seems to encapsulate Oklahoma fans, Sooner Nation as a whole, after the initial shock of the Lincoln Riley departure. This fan base, at least based on the feedback that we get, which is quite a bit here from week to week and throughout all the video comments that we receive every day, the fan base seems to be pretty galvanized and excited about the Brent Venables tenure.
They really are, Mark. I think, I think to a certain degree, what Lincoln Riley did, he woke up a little bit of a sleeping giant. I think, we've talked about the monster that is the Oklahoma football program, and the fact that Oklahoma hasn't won a national championship since the year 2000, and that monster, is something that really needs to be fed. But I think what had happened, and we talked about this, with a little bit of the downward trajectory that had been happening with Oklahoma program over the last 3 years, and to get a guy who is such a team guy, such a relationship guy, had been part of this program, had been part of obviously the 2000 national championship team. What he's doing just in an early period, and bringing back a lot of the former players that are part of the coaching staff. They've brought back a lot of former players that are part of this soul program that Brent Venables has instituted early on. He's hit all of the right buttons. Oklahoma, the official Oklahoma Twitter page has some, because Oklahoma started a little bit of spring practice, and they've got some, they've got some clips that they show, and you see, you see Venables just up in their face yelling and screaming, and it's just a different mentality that Oklahoma has had. You hardly would ever see Riley in a situation where he was screaming at them, and in a positive way, right? So I think that renewed toughness, I think that renewed vigor that has brought a lot of excitement for Oklahoma. And I think specifically on the defensive side of the ball, I think there's been so many years that Oklahoma fans watching this team just get sick and tired of watching a defense not perform over and over again. There's been a couple of years where it's been a little bit better. Um, you know, Year before, Oklahoma was in the top 30 defensive overall, and you thought they were making a little bit of a run, and then this past year was a little bit of a step down, certainly to where they are. But you've got to think, and love listening to your interview with Parker a couple of weeks ago, and you know I agree with him. I can't imagine a situation where, with all of the talent that Oklahoma still has brought in on the defensive side of the ball, all the talent from a coaching perspective, Brent Venables' track record of being, if not the best, one of the best recruiters, motivators, defensive coordinators, coaches in all of college football, getting Oklahoma back to a top 30 team defensively. It's hard to imagine that not happening. Yeah, they could struggle a little bit early, just kind of understanding the scheme, understanding exactly what Brent Venables and Todd Bates and Roof and Jay Valai and all these guys want out of their defense. But I think you'll see a much different team, a much more sound team, a much more disciplined team, a much a much better team playing together as a team overall this year. And I think, I've remarked to a couple of people, this might be the most excitement that there's been specifically for a spring game, right? Because you have, pretty much a brand new coaching staff, obviously almost completely new on the defensive side of the ball. And then you've got a new quarterback coming in that people are going to want to see. You've got a new offensive system that people are going to want to see. Obviously, the intrigue with Brent Venables coming over is something that you're going to want to see. A new defensive, obviously staff, but a new defensive system as well, that you're going to want to see. So I think there's more intrigue, specifically starting with this spring game, than there has been in quite some time. So I think that's generated a ton of excitement, and I think Mark, I think, at least from my perspective, I think you look at where I think a lot of people thought Oklahoma might be this year after everything that happened with Riley and then entering in Venables. I think a lot of people thought, okay, we'll take a little bit of a step back in terms of what Oklahoma's productivity could be this year. I think a lot of people at that point thought, okay, we've lost all of these recruits. Not sure exactly what's going to happen in terms of the staff hirings and things like that. But you've got maybe a potentially an 8-4, 9-3 step back season a little bit. But then when you look at how Venables was able to completely rectify the recruiting cycle. I know that listening to and we've mentioned this. Oklahoma at one point was at number 21, and to get from number 21 to 8 in such a short time was remarkable. When you talk about all of the transfer portal guys that they were able to bring in to really solidify some areas of weakness that this team has had is I think big. And I couldn't agree more with Parker. The concern, I don't have as much concern probably on the running back side that maybe maybe he did. I think Oklahoma will whether it be a couple of freshmen getting into the mix, whether it be Eric Gray, whether it be Marcus Major, what that is. I do think the biggest concern probably is the offensive line still, just to see how much better those kids can get in one season. I think the addition of the Cal transfer will be big among the offensive line, and then you've got some guys that have been here a while that's just not really been able to put it all together. And are they able to do that? Staff's not a whole lot different. Obviously, that you still got Bedenbow as the offensive line coach, but how much of a difference does the off-season strength and conditioning come in? How big of a difference is to get those guys at a level that you would expect them to be? So yeah, there's tons of excitement coming into the season where where you look, Mark, that maybe this team is not necessarily the same trajectory that we talked about at this point last year, just in terms of this being a team that really absolutely should make the college football playoff, has a really, really big chance to win a national championship. Whereas now you've got a team that I think a lot of people think this team can still challenge Baylor. They can still challenge with Texas, and who knows what Oklahoma State will have for a conference championship. And if you win a conference championship in the Big 12, particularly if you only go into that game with a single loss, then you've put yourself in a position to possibly get back to that college football playoff.